Now, this might shock you, but understanding the way light works is actually central to understanding how our rights work as well. And like, how do those interact? Simply this, that you know how when you're at the grocery store or whatever, you have two different lights, they shine both on you from different angles, and so you have a darkened shadow, and then you can see the difference as well, where the two separate shadows kind of go off in their own direction. That example is what is used throughout the content of various court cases here in the United States to explain the different rights, privileges that are afforded by different constitutional protections. So, for example, the most famous use of this is actually in Roe versus Wade, but it is also included in places like Griswold versus Connecticut, which overturned a law that made contraception illegal. So this is something that is throughout the, I guess, legal doctrine of the United States. We just haven't seen this before. You might not have maybe heard or seen that word before. But what it results in is you have, so keeping in mind the illustration of that, you have the light sources shining on a single object, which in this case would be the Constitution, shining two separate overlapping shadows. The objective rights that we have, which are enshrined in the Constitution, would include things like, in the First Amendment, you have religion, press, assembly, speech, protest, right? And then the Second Amendment, which might be the more famous of the two, unfortunately, is the right to bear arms, right? But in the content of that objective right, that objective human right, which is explicitly stated, would be that, like for the Second Amendment, you have the right to bear arms. However, in that language is not afforded explicitly things like selling arms or buying arms, which is an interesting kind of legal conundrum, that you have the right to have something on your person, but you technically don't have the right to buy it or sell it objectively, as far as the way the wording is concerned. So as those two shadows overlap in their own individual shadows, which would be called an umbral, which is what that's called, an umbral shadow, is that in that is you have the umbral privileges. This is where law enforcement often comes in, that it's technically an essential function of that right. So continuing with the example of bearing arms, you have the right to bear it, you just don't have an umbral privilege would be the purchase, storage, and transfer of a firearm. It would also, in umbral, it would be modern technological advancement in that firearm, whether that's, let's say, bump stocks, or whether that's the ARs or the AKs or the Smith & Wesson, whatever your favorite is. With that with an umbral privilege, is that as would cover any of those, as well as what is non-interference of operation. If you're out at the range, or if you're out in the wilderness somewhere looking for a deer, that'd be non-interference of operation. That a cop can't just walk up on you and take your gun away, because you have the objective right to bear it, and you have an umbral privilege of that. If you have the right to if you have the right to have it, then you have the right to use it as well. Beyond that, where those two things overlap would be called the penumbra. In that penumbra would be things that you could say kind of fit, but aren't explicitly stated, and aren't really an essential function of it either. So Where that penumbra comes in most explicitly, or most famously, as I already alluded to, is that Roe v. Wade decision, which says that if contraception is protected, which they refer back to Griswold versus Connecticut for that, and then within that establishment is, you could say, like an expression of that, or an interpretive or subjectively implicit aspect of that could be abortion. And they refer to 4 different amendments that kind of overlap together to create this penumbral gap called abortion in the constitutional protection. Those 4 are the First Amendment, which they refer to speech as expression, and assembly. So that you being present in an abortion clinic is covered by the right to assembly, and then your right to express yourself is covered by the freedom of speech. That the second thing would be the third, which in the Third Amendment is that the military can't quarter troops in your home, which has been often extended to mean that the government can't do anything in your personal life, essentially, without permission. It can't act on you without your consent, essentially. And so if the government wants to impose on you a ban that makes you carry a life to term, that would be an imposition beyond the Third Amendment. The Fourth Amendment is privacy, search and seizure, your right to have access to your own papers, and that the government can't just take from or seize or search through your private effects or person without a legal search warrant. And then the ninth is that basically the Bill of Rights is not a complete list. That this list will not say that you don't have other rights not afforded within it. It's a short list. And then the 10th, which also does kind of fit, is that the limited government or federalism, that anything not explicitly given to the government is not theirs to take as regarding authority or powers. So with that, all those different light sources, if you want to say, those objective statements of rights and facts, those things overlap to give you this right to abortion. The only thing about that is, with the Ninth Amendment as well, is that one right cannot take away from another's rights. So my right to swing my hands around, which Ben Shapiro likes, my right to swing my fist around doesn't give me a right to let it hit your face. And that is, like I mentioned, that at the umbral privileges is where law enforcement kind of takes over, that you have the right to bear an arm and you have the right to use an arm, but you cannot use it to take someone else's life without consequence, right? Also, you don't have the right, you have the right to bear arms, but because you don't have the explicitly stated right to buy or sell them, that if you get out of prison, that law enforcement will then revoke essentially your right to buy or sell a gun. So if you have a gun and you can't register it and you can't have a bill of sale for it because you couldn't buy it or sell it, then your possession of it is now illegal on grounds of that you couldn't buy it, so how do you have it? And you can't sell it either, so that means you can't get rid of it either. And that you're also not allowed to store it. So, it's this weird, kind of very fluid constitutional area. But once you get down from umbral to penumbral privileges, things like the fact that abortion kills a child means that even though those things could be construed to overlap to create this pocket of legality for it, because it takes a human life, it should be regarded as unconstitutional anyways. The only thing that prevents it from doing so is the argument within the law that says that the point of humanity, that at first, within the first trimester, according to Roe v. Wade, first trimester, that no law should be restrictive, supposedly, and then the second trimester that state governments or whatever can kind of figure their own things out, and then the third trimester is off limits, that it should not be legal under any circumstance, which flies in the face of, let's say, the Virginia governor saying that you could literally give a live birth and then decide whether or not to kill it after. That when we're talking about a human being, your right to act upon it is unconstitutional. That you can't, like, using again the example of a firearm, you can have a firearm constitutionally. You can't hurt anyone with it, though, unless you have overriding precedent to do so. Self-defense, home invasion, something that grants external justification. So, with the concept, with the act of abortion, if you want to make an argument that it is constitutional or it is legal, that the only way you can do that is to say that the woman is acting in self-defense, or that it's overwhelmingly impositional for her to carry the child to term. So beyond that, you can discuss this on your own, I guess. I mean, just give me some feedback, like what are you talking about, and we'll go from there.